What is going on, YouTube? It's James Q Quick from Learn, Build, Teach. It's been a couple of weeks since I posted a video, so I needed to get back on here and record something. And I've been working on the side project that I'll probably talk about in a few weeks or so. But it uses Node as a backend server and then Express to create easy way to create API routes and endpoints and things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you an intro to Node and Express for beginners. Let's go ahead and dive on in. All right, so just to obviously get you all started, you're going to need to download Node if you don't already. The latest recommended version, latest stable version is 12.13. Once you install that, you can come into here and do a node-v. You can see I've got 12.8, so I'm a little bit behind, but not very far. For the most part, any recent version of Node 8 Plus will work with the things that we're about to do here. So you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. So to get started with Node, all you need is Node installed. You need an editor like we have now, and then you need a JavaScript file. So let's start with, I'm going to create an app.js file. Touch is just a command in Linux to create a file. So it's up here. I'm going to open that up, and I'm just going to log out hello world. So this is a Node file. This is a JavaScript file that we can run using Node on our machine with Node installed. So the way that works is you run Node and then the name of the file, so app.js. And this will run that file. It'll go through and do whatever it is that's in that file. And notice that it ran the file, it did the hello world, but then it basically returned. So that command is done, the program is done executing, it doesn't stay on. So you can create web servers with Node, and it's got the ability to do endpoints and things like that. But the de facto way to do this is with Express, probably one of the biggest packages on NPM, Node Package Manager. It's probably one of the biggest. It's definitely, anytime you hear Node tutorial, you're probably using Express. So I think this is the best way to go, especially when you're getting started. You can see it's got over 10 million weekly downloads, so you know it's super, super popular. So with our JavaScript file here, we also need to now, to make this a JavaScript project, according to Node, is do an npm init. So what this is going to do, I'm just going to enter yes for all of these, Node and Express. That should be all right. I'm just going to say yes, yes, yes. It's asking for some metadata about the project, the version, description, the entry point, what's like the starting file that should be started for this, a test command, get repository, keywords, author, this could be James Q Quick. License, usually by default, it's just pretty open. And then yes, that looks good. So what that npm init is going to do, it's going to create this package.json file. This just represents the metadata about our project. Now, with this in place, with this being considered a JavaScript project or an npm project, whatever you want to call it, we can now run npm install. npm comes with Node, so when you installed Node, you got npm as well, Node Package Manager, and we want to install Express. So this will go through, it'll go out to npm, it'll actually get all the files for that library, it will bring them and put them inside of Node modules. You can see it's got lots of different folders in here. That's because Express, which is right here, actually depends on all those other things. So once you pull in a package, typically it's going to pull in a bunch of other packages. And it's cool because that's all you need. That's all you need to do. So with that installed now, I think that's all we need from that perspective. Or actually, let me show you one last thing. Inside of the package.json, you'll see that it added a dependency section and shows Express as a dependency. This way, typically you don't like check in this Node modules folder to your source code. You ignore it, and then based on this section of dependencies and the package.lock.json, someone else who pulls your project from GitHub maybe can just run npm install. It'll download all the packages that they need to get up and going, and you don't have to check in all of these folders, which is actually pretty big. So we've got all of that stuff in place. Now we can start to get into using Express. So we're going to say const express equals require Express. So if you're new to Node, require is a way to basically work with modules in Node. If you use kind of browser modern imports. You can do imports instead of require. Node still uses require for the most part. I think they're working on updating this to the import syntax, but it's not there yet. So we do a require, and this says we want to require the express library. That thing returns back this express variable, and then from that we can get our app by calling basically the express function or constructor. So it's going to return us back the app that we want to use. And then to start our server, we do app.listen, tell it which port to listen on, and then we can pass a callback. And so inside of this callback, we can say listening on port 3030. All right, so this is your basic Hello World Express server. So now we can run node app.js again, run that here, and it says listening on port 3030. Notice also that the command didn't finish. It hasn't terminated. The process is still out there running. That's because this is actually a real server that's out there listening for incoming requests, which is pretty cool. So we've got that in place. One of the things I would recommend doing is installing npm install -g. So installing globally a global package, nodemon. And what nodemon, I've already got it installed, so it'll probably run through pretty quick. Or maybe it'll update it. I don't know what it's going to do. But with nodemon install, instead of running the command node app.js, you can run nodemon app.js. And what this is going to do is it's telling you here it's watching for different directories and files that have a JS or a JSON or an MJS extension, and it's going to restart the server anytime that happens. And actually, I've got a typo here, so let's fix that. And when I save this and then hands off, don't do anything else, it's going to restart that server. This is super, super useful as a developer when you're in development with a Node project. I use this. I never run just Node and then a file name. I always use nodemon. That's what I would recommend you doing as well. So one of the things that you will want to know is right now, I'm basically hard coding this port of 3000. I'm not going to get into deployment of Node applications now, but when you actually do deploy your Node application to a host like Heroku, for example, that's a great one to take advantage of. When you do that, you don't really hard code the port. You really want to use the port that they give you because you don't know what that port is going to be. So you need to take that port from Heroku. So what they're going to do is they're going to put a property called port inside of an environment variable. In Node, the way you access that is through process.env and then whatever the variable name is. In this case, it's port. But for development, we don't actually have an environment variable called port. So typically what happens is you get a variable, const port, and you assign it to either process.env.port or a default port that you can use locally. And if you're not familiar with this syntax, basically it's going to say if this is not a thing, if this variable does not exist, if it's falsy, you can look up truthy and falsy in JavaScript. If that thing does not exist, which in development mode it's not, go ahead and take this default value of 3000. Then we'll tell it to listen on that port. And then just to update our message here, I'm going to use ES6 template literal strings and say we're listening on port and then use the variable instead of a hard-coded 3000 there as well. So let's save this. It's going to refresh. It says listening on port 3000. That's good. That's what we want. So we've got the scaffolding of our application or of a web server up. Now we need to actually create endpoints. And I'll talk a little bit about RESTful routing and what that means in terms of creating basically API endpoints in this case. And so RESTful routing means if you have some sort of object that you're working with, like a book. So typically in applications, you have 4 different things that you can do. They fall into the Crud Operations category. So Crud stands for create, read, update, and delete. So if for a book tracking application, how many books have you read, for example? One, you want to create a book. You want to add a book to the list that you've read. You want to read from the database the books that you've read. You want to be able to update those books. So maybe you say, I'm currently reading, and then you go back and update it to say you finished. And then maybe you want to get rid of a book because you thought you were going to read it and you never actually did or whatever. So Crud, basically most APIs revolve around RESTful routing, and that revolves around CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Those translate to HTTP methods like post for create, a get for read, update or actually put, and delete for delete. So these HTTP methods really correspond to these CRUD acronym, the words of the CRUD acronyms. So we're going to use that to get started. So let's do just our hello world endpoint here. So app.get, and we'll say the route is just going to be nothing. And then this takes a callback function that takes a request and a response. I'm just using ES6 arrow functions here. And inside of here, we can run hello world. All right, so this is a get endpoint, a get route with no extra path to it, just basically the default route. And it's just going to log out console world, and then we're also going to send hello world as the response back to the requester. So this thing is running on port 3000. We can go to localhost 3000, and now we should see a string come back, say hello world, and then I can bump that up for you to see out there, and then we see the log coming up here. So that's really cool. Now we want to get into what we're talking about up here of CRUD operations revolving around some sort of object. So if we start with, let's create some dummy data up here, const books equals, and this would be database that you're data that's usually in a database. Let's say we're gonna have title is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. All right, so there's one title or one book, and then the author is J.K. Rowling. And I'm just gonna copy this and paste it again. So we'll do Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Obviously a big Harry Potter fan. And then the author will be the same. So that's the data that we're going to work with behind the scenes. Now we want to create endpoints that represent the CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete to interface or work with the books data. So let's start with a get. Let's do app.get, and we're going to make a get request to /books. The same format of request response. And now when you make a get request to /books to whatever kind of the root path is to that object, typically you just want to return all of those books or all of those objects. So a get here, I'm not looking for a specific book. I'm looking for just a list of all of the books. So in here, I would do a res.send and then just send all of my books. So let's, we've got that saved. NodeMon restarted the server. We can go over here now to /books, and we should see here's all of the books, right? Returning JSON there, automatically converts it to JSON. Now we see that in the browser. Super cool. We can also do the same thing, basically, except we want to get a specific book. So if we wanted to get maybe just the first book or the second book, a book by a specific ID, the way we structure that is we do /books and then / whatever the ID is. But we can't hard code this route to say /book/5. We need to say we're going to take some kind of generic value is going to come here, and we represent that by this colon, and then we can get the value of this thing from rec.params.id. ID here is the name, is what we named it in the route. So this matches up. We could call this variable anything. We'll call it ID just because it kind of makes sense. But rec.params.id will give us access to that ID that we need. And then we don't want to send back just the books. We want to send back the books at that index or at that ID. So if we just kind of use ID as 0, 1, so on and so on, pass in ID here. So let's save that again. Let's go, so this is /books, that still works. Let's go to /books/0. This should send us back Order of the Phoenix there. All right, we got that. And then 1 will send us back Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Super cool. All right. Now we get into something other than get request. We get into a post. Now, a post request is used typically when you want to have something actually be saved or added typically in your database from the server. So if we wanted to add a book to our list, we could add an endpoint here, a post endpoint, and we'll do a post to /books. So we're going to keep that there. We'll do request response. And what we really want to do here is get book data out of the body, save that book, and then there's different formal things that you can return here. Often what you'll see is either the ID of the resource that you just added or the book that we just added that we saved. All right. So to be able to test this, let me get rid of some of this stuff up here. I'm going to open up an application called Postman. If you haven't installed Postman, you definitely want to. It's going to be for any API design or routes or things like that that you're creating. You're absolutely going to want and need Postman, and that's what we're going to use here. Let me make this. All right, so you can see, all right, no, I don't need to update. I don't need to save. Just close those, get them out of the way. This is actually a hint at the project that I'm working on. I want to turn it into a course, so keep an eye out for that. If you saw what those endpoints were, you see a little hint over here as well. All right, so what we want to do is we want to send a request to localhost 3000, and let's just send a GET request to /books. This should return back the same data that we saw in the browser. So a browser actually makes GET request. Browser can't make post requests that you can see in code. It can, but not from just like typing stuff into a URL. So let's change this to a post, and we're going to post to /books. We're going to say the body is going to be raw text, that is JSON, and just going to type in some JSON in here. We're going to say title equals Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. All right, and then the author is J.K. Rowling again. All right, so there we go. So we're posting this data, and we've got our endpoint here that receives data. So we can log out, trying to save the data just so we see it. We're not returning anything yet, so this post should go off. We'll see our log over here trying to save the data. We're not returning anything, so this thing is going to time out. We'll just cancel it for now. What we want to happen, we want to get that information out of the body of the post and then use that information to save to the database. Now, I'm double checking here because this has changed recently. You can't, typically the way you get access to the body is through rec.body, and that would log out all of that data. But in this case, it's going to fail. It says it's undefined, because you need to set up Express to be able to handle JSON coming over in the body. So let's look up Express body parser. It uses a package called body parser, and let's see where. Never remember where it finds exactly. Don't need body parser in Express. So this used to be something that you didn't have to include. Then you had to add it. So they took it out of Core Express. Now they've added it back into Core Express because of complaints from users. And now we can use it ourselves with Express 4.16 plus. So what happens is, I'll just copy this line in. Nope, stay on that same page, come back over. Before all of our routes, we're going to say app.use and then express.json. This is basically telling Express to be able to parse JSON data and give it to us in the body. And then one thing we need to do is let it do that with URL encoded data as well. So these two lines, actually this one, express.url encoded, so it's the same, almost the same thing. Sorry for bouncing back and forth. Let me copy that. So we're not using body parser. We don't have to install any extra packages. We just add these two lines from built-in Express to say, hey, we want to be able to parse information coming in, for example, in a post request and get access to it in the request.body. So let's run this post request again. Let's do a post to /books. And here now we should see we get the body. So that should match up with what the information was that we submitted in the body. So what we'll do is we'll take that information. We'll say const book equals rec.body. we'll give, then we'll add that thing to our list of books. So our array of books, books.push, and we'll push on our new book. And then we'll res.send the book that we just saved. All right, now we don't need these things. So now let's submit this. We should get back that it saved that thing. All right, looks good. Now if we come back over and do a GET request, actually sorry for bouncing around again. If we come back and do a GET to /books, now we should see that that thing has been saved. So we have 3 books in our database. But the thing you should know, this is obviously not a real database. If I save this and restart our server, the in-memory stuff gets reset and we only have 2 things. So because NodeMon is restarting all the time, anything that we save in memory in that array is going to reset every time we restart our server, just so you know. All right. So now we get into a put request. So let's say we want to update a book. This becomes a put. So it'll be a /books. And the 2 things you need to update an item in Express, or just kind of any endpoint that you define, you need to know which resource you want to update. So the ID of that thing, usually a unique identifier for that specific object that you want to update. And then you also want to know what the data is that you want to override with that previous information, what information you want to update. So we already know how to get a specific ID out of the URL. So it'll look just like that. Then we'll add in our request and response. And so we'll get the ID, const ID equals rec.params.id. This will get us the unique ID for that book. Then we can get the update book from rec.body. So the same way we got it here, just calling it update book instead. And now what we'll do is we'll just say books of ID now equals updated book. So it's going to change, it's going to update whatever book is at this ID, that index, and it's going to update it. And then we'll return res.send the updated book. Not updated, but update book. There we go. Make sure those look good. Okay. All right, cool. So we'll start off with, we get our list of 2 items here. Now we can do a put request to 0. This will update the first one. And we'll update it to be Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So let's do that. So let's submit this. It should override Order to the Phoenix with Chamber of the Secrets. Let's submit. And then let's do a GET request to see them all again. And make sure that now we see Chamber of Secrets instead of Deathly Hallows. Now, again, just to reiterate this, typically you're going to be working with a real database. You're not just working with information stored in an array. And here, you're going to be working with a real database. This is just to kind of show you how these API routes and things work with Express and Node. So the last thing we want to do is do a delete. So we want to delete an item. And what we need to be able to delete an item is to know which item we want to delete. So this will also be /books/ID. Actually, why don't we just, I'm going to copy this, paste it down here, replace delete, replace updated book. There's not going to be any body. And we can return back the ID of the book that we deleted. And we can basically just delete that, that book by saying books equals, and there's, I always have to look these up so we can look them up together. Let's see, books, splice, or not book splice, wow, array splice JavaScript. Let's look this up together so I'll make sure I get it right. Let's see, index, how many you want to remove, and does this, so in, which is used to modify the contents of an array by removing elements. Okay, so we don't have to reassign this thing. We can call books.splice and give it the ID, the index, and just say we only want to remove start and then delete count. Yeah, we only want to remove 1 and then return back that ID. I think that's how Splice works. I look it up every time. If you're a JavaScript developer and you have to look up stuff too, it's totally natural. Don't be freaked out. We all have to do it. So let's save this. Now let's do our GET request. We should have 2 items starting off with Order of Phoenix, right? Because this is back to the default data. And now let's do a delete. Actually, sorry, let's leave that GET here. Let's just open up a new tab and say localhost 3000 and books. And this is actually going to be book/0 because we're going to do a delete of 0. Let's do that. Returns back that ID. Now if we do our get request, it should be that Deathly Hallows is the only one that's in there. Cool. So that worked. All right. So splice, the other one is slice, and I always get them confused. And there's lots of ways to remove something from an array. That is one of the easiest and quickest. One thing to know though is let's save our server here. All right, let's save our server. And just because of the way we have stuff set up in a dummy fashion, if we get books at index of 0, when we have 2 items, it's going to be Order of the Phoenix, right? Because when we have our 2 items, the first one is Order of the Phoenix. The second one is Deathly Hallows. Let me just pull this up again so we can see it later. So the first one is Order of the Phoenix. If we then do a delete on 0, we get rid of that thing, remove it from the array. Now, no longer is the 0th element, the ID 0 Order of the Phoenix. Now it's going to be Deathly Hallows because the array now, the indices have changed in the array. So just another, again, this is not how you work with data in real life. You put stuff in a database. This is just to show you how those endpoints and express work. So this is basically the CRUD operations for an object or an item called books. And this is anytime you work on a project, you'll probably have a file for books, for users, for blah, blah, blah. And they'll all have very similar layout and structure. And you can, if you always kind of remember, this is how RESTful routing works. And these are the endpoints that you need to support that. You really won't have any problem, and you'll get used to it the more you do it. One thing I do want to show that I think is important here also, I pulled this up earlier, is right now, all of these endpoints are basically just API endpoints. So this is just someone calling into our application to get data back. Often, or in addition to that, what you want to return back is HTML. So you actually want to return back a web page that users can use, right? So to do that, you set up something called, or you designate a static directory that Express knows if people make a request to / something, it can look in the static directory first. And this is saying that it's going to look for, not in node modules, get out of there. It's going to look for any files that are inside of a public directory. So if I put in index HTML in here, and I stubbed it out in VS Code, you can do bang and then enter. It'll stub it out for you. So node and express and h1 tag hello node and express. Save that. So I've got this HTML file because express we've registered the static directory to be public. If I now go to this thing and do index HTML, it's going to return back that HTML to me. Now, the reason is, and Node is actually very logical when you break it down. When a request comes in, what Node is going to do is it's going to run through all of the things that it's using, including endpoints down here, and it's going to try to find the first match for whatever you requested. So because I requested the resource index HTML, it's first going to look in the public directory. It's going to find that index.html, and it's going to return that thing. Now, if I request /books, oh, what I do wrong there? Did I not type that in right? Books, there we go. If I request /books, it's going to first look in public. There's no file called books. It's going to come down to my endpoint. It's going to say it's a get and it's /books. This is what I want to return now. So a lot of times by default, in the root directory, especially with single page apps, you will return res.send file and you will return index.html. Now this thing will look for a file called index.html inside of that public directory, or it doesn't have to be public. It's whatever you designated to be static in this case, and typically it's the public directory. So let's go back to the root now, and here we should see the hello node and express. So I don't know how much experience you have with React or Angular, Vue, or single page applications. Basically with those applications, For the most part, you just send back an index.html and JavaScript takes care of all the rest. So inside of a public directory, you would have all the files needed for your React application, your Angular application, your Vue application, all inside of here. When users come to the root, it would request index.html. It would send back that application to the browser, and then the user would interact with the server by calling these API endpoints. That's typically how it works with single page applications. You can also have templating in Node and Express, where you can generate your HTML on the server, and that's a viable option as well. And you would have additional endpoints to support sending back that HTML. Now, that might all be a little bit too much at this point. What I really hope you understand is how to create a basic Express server, how to create endpoints that correspond to CRUD operations and RESTful routing, not necessarily standards, but just kind of how things work traditionally. We set up this static directory, and that will serve any file that's inside of that public directory if people request it. We can also specify to send back a file directly from that public directory this way. One last thing I want to mention, and this is actually important and can mess you up, is, let's see, I know they have it down here. This one. So I'm going to copy this in and then I'll talk about the difference. So using the static stuff here, this is looking for a directory called public inside of whatever directory you're running node from. So instead of doing that, you can basically do a full path. And this will use path, and I think you have to include this. So const path equals require path. All right, so it is just a little bit safer here to go ahead and define the full path, the absolute path to where that public directory is, instead of letting it be relative to your the folder that you're running the application in. So always a little bit better practice, but that's basically how you set up your public directory. So we talked about how to have some dummy data in here, talk about installing packages that we need. We talked about CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete, HTTP methods, RESTful routing. We define endpoints for books, and then we use Postman to send endpoints to test that stuff out. That's the basics of how Node and Express work to set up a server. Obviously, there's a lot more and it gets a lot deeper, interacting with a database, all that sort of stuff, but that's the basics. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm curious what your experience is with Node and Express. Do you like it? Have you used it? Are you building any cool projects? If you are, share in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out learnbuildteach.com to sign up for the newsletter to learn about my latest content. Thanks for watching.